Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Jean Wilson, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Northwestern Branch for the Royal Society of Biology. And it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce you to Janet Preece, who's one of our committee members. And she is also an apiarist and a lecturer in, well, she was a lecturer in marine biology and coastal ecology. So a very diverse background, and so it's over to you, Janet, and thank you very much for offering to do this lecture for us tonight. Okay.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. I didn't realise that I was going to draw quite a big audience, so I'm really glad that you've been able to make it and took an hour of your time to have a about honeybees and anatomy. Just before we start, if anyone's got any questions, you'll all be on mute, so you won't actually be able to ask a question through your microphones or anything. So if you want to put anything in the chat boxes, please feel free. You can also see on that front page that my email address is there, so if you've got any burning questions that you want to ask me after the talk, please feel free, and I'll also be around at the end of the talk just in case you want to ask any more questions and stuff, so we'll try and keep an eye on those. Hopefully I'll try and get as much information about honeybee anatomy across to you as possible tonight. So as Jean said, I'm an apiarist, so I'm a beekeeper, and I've been keeping bees for 9 years now. And I'm a small beekeeper in terms of the number of colonies that I have. So at the moment I've only got 2 colonies, but I've had up to about 8 or 10 over the time that I've been beekeeping. I'm the education officer at the Fylde Beekeepers, and I'm also a member of the British Beekeeping Association, which is the BBKA, and that's a national association, and through them I've actually done some assessments on beekeeping. So I've done things like exams in honeybee biology, and also microscopy and things like that, and that's where my interest in this type of aspect of honeybees has actually grown. There's a lot of different types of honeybees. I'm going to be talking tonight about the Western honeybee. So that's the one that you'll see around in the UK, and that's the one that I look after, and that's Apis mellifera. And I'm only going to focus on the external anatomy tonight as well. I've plenty to talk about. I could wax lyrical about honeybees, so I've had to try and condense everything into the talk. So internal anatomy will have to wait for maybe a future talk. The other thing is that all the images that I've used, apart from this lovely GIF on the at the start of the talk, actually my own. So there are a couple of iffy pictures as we go through the talk. Hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about as we go through the talk. So hopefully they'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to see. So before we get into the actual anatomy of honeybees, I just wanted to go through a very quick classification. This is your biology lesson for the evening. I'm not going to linger on this. You don't need to remember it. There's no tests at the end. But as we go through the anatomy, we'll actually find that some of these features will actually cover as we go through. So obviously honeybees are animals from the kingdom Animalia. And then as we go down the classification system, they're in the phylum Arthropoda. And Arthropoda basically means anything with jointed legs. When we go on to look at the leg structure, you'll find that there's lots of joints there. In the class Insecta, so they are an insect, and I've got some features there of what insects share. So they've got an exoskeleton, which basically means the skeleton is on the outside of the body. And again, as we talk through the structure of the honeybee, we'll see what sort of limitations that gives to the bee and what they actually do about it. They've got a 3-part body: head, thorax and abdomen. They've got 3 pairs of jointed legs, so they've got 6 legs in total, got compound eyes, and they've got 1 pair of antennae. So these are the sorts of things that we're going to be having a look at tonight. If we go into the order Hymenoptera, again, that means that they've got membranous looking wings. So again, we're going to have a look at the structure of the wings. And this is one of the biggest groups of insects as well, the hymenopterans. And it includes the things such as wasps, all the other bees, so your bumblebees, your solitary bees, and also ants. And then while I was researching this, I had a quick look, and it also includes sawflies, and I have no idea what they are. So any sawfly experts out there, you know, you might have an opening there for a good talk. We go down to the family Apidae, so that will include the bumblebees, honeybees, and all the solitary bees. And if we're looking at UK species, we've got about 250 species of bees. The vast majority which are actually solitary, they live life in a single nest. When we go down to the genus, we've got Apis, so these are the actual true honeybees, and these are characterised by having a eusocial behaviour, so they actually form big colonies, and they make perennial nests. So basically the nests last all year. A lot of other wasps and bees, the nests break down over the year, so they actually break up, and the queens overwinter alone. And then we get down to the species level, and the western honeybee is mellifera. So we're looking at Apis mellifera. So that's your little bit of biology at the beginning of the talk. And just a little sideline is that all bees evolved from wasps. So if you know a little bit about evolution, wasps were the first bee, basically. And bees just became vegetarian, I suppose, whereas wasps have got a carnivorous part of their lifestyle. A little bit of classification there, so we're coming back to some of these features in a bit. So I'm assuming when I put this talk together, I was assuming that people knew very little about honeybees. So we'll just go through a little life cycle, and obviously it gives me a chance to show you some other pictures as well. So honeybees exhibit complete metamorphosis. That means that the younger stages, the life stages, look very different from the adult stages. So what a queen does, a queen honeybee, is she will lay an egg in a wax cell. So each wax cell will have a single egg that's laid right at the bottom. And as a beekeeper, we are obsessed with looking for eggs. If we can see eggs, we're fairly certain that there's going to be a queen around in that colony. However, the eggs are very tiny. They're only about that egg there. It looks very big on your screen potentially, but it's about 1.5 millimetres long. And so it looks a little bit like a small grain of rice. And she'll lay that egg into the bottom of the cell, and then that egg will sit there for about 3 days, and then it will hatch. And it will hatch into a larvae, excuse me, and the larvae will be the part of the life cycle where it does most of its growing in size. So the larvae will start as very, very small, and then it will go through some molts. So going back to that skeleton around the outside of your body, it's really hard to grow bigger. So you've got to shed your skin basically to be able to grow in size. So this larvae will have to go through a certain number of molts as it gets bigger. To get bigger, it needs to be fed. So the adult bees will be feeding the larvae, and they will be giving it all the nutrition. And that will include things like royal jelly, pollen, which is the protein part of the bee's diet, and also honey or nectar, which is the carbohydrates or the sugars of the diet. The larva looks segmented, so we can see here that it looks a little bit like a Michelin Man type structure. So you can see that it's made of a segmented body, and at one end it will have a mouth, so it will be able to suck up that liquid food, and then it will be able to breathe through those little tiny holes on the side of its body called the spiracles. So rather than just having one mouth that they breathe through, insects and bees actually breathe through the sides of their bodies, and the holes that they breathe through are called spiracles. This is actually a queen larvae, we can see, and I've opened up a queen cell. So when a colony is making a new queen, it will put that queen into a bit of a bigger cell to raise it. And it will fill that, well, it'll put lots and lots of royal jelly in that cell. So the liquid part that you can see that larvae is floating is actually royal jelly. And so the larvae will be there sucking all that royal jelly up, going through its mould and just getting bigger and bigger. At some point, it will want to pupate. And pupation goes on behind closed doors, so we don't normally see lots of pupating bees. At the end of the pupation period, out pops an adult bee. So you can see that the body plan of that adult bee is very, very different from the larvae, and that's what we call complete metamorphosis. The younger life stages look very different from the adult ones. To let you know that, and we'll come to this occasionally through the talk, that there are 3 members of bees in a colony, 2 sexes, females and males, and the females are split up into the queen, which is the bee that lays all the eggs and is the mother of all the bees, and a worker, and this is a picture of a worker bee. And the females are made from fertilised eggs, and then the drones, which are the males, are made from unfertilised eggs. So this is a female worker bee. We'll be talking about her quite a lot tonight because she does all the jobs in the hive. Okay, queen does mainly one job, so she is basically an egg laying machine, and hopefully you can see her there with a big green dot on her back. What you'll may be able to see, but you might not, it's not clear in that picture, is that she's actually very long compared to the workers that are around her. Her abdomen is actually quite big, and it's just packed full of eggs. And a queen will lay up to about 2,000 eggs a day. So someone told me that was something like egg every 45 seconds. I've never sat down and done the maths, but it sounds pretty impressive. It's a bit of a boring life. All she does is lay eggs all day. So usually only one queen in the colony. She's usually the mother of all of those bees. And I get asked sometimes, is she born with a dot on her back? And the answer is no. The beekeepers are obsessed with looking for the queen to make sure that she's there. So we nice big pink on the back, because when you've got a colony that's got 50,000 bees in it, it's very hard to spot one single queen. So you end up being Where's Wally most of the time. So she's the queen, nothing other than lay eggs. And then we have drone. So this is a side-on view of the drone. It looks a bit like a fluffy teddy bear, I think. The drones again have one job to do, and that is basically to mate with the queen. But they are designed to just fly and mate, basically. So that sniffing out queens, smelling her pheromones, and then going and mating with her. So again, while we're going through the talk, we'll be talking a little bit about how drones are adapted to, with their structure and things. So if we go back to our adult bee, we've got the 3 main zones of the body. We've got the head, the thorax and the abdomen. So the head is usually the end, and we're going to go through these sections through the talk. So we'll start off with the head, we'll go on to the thorax, and then we'll have a brief look at the abdomen. So the head is the bit where all the sense organs are. So we'll be having a look at some of the sense organs and how bees use those, and also the feeding appendages, so the mouth parts and things. Thorax is basically where the limbs come off the bee. So we've got the legs coming off there, so the 3 pairs of legs, and also the wings as well. So we'll have a look at those as we're going through the talk. And then the abdomen is usually, this part, but a lot of the stuff is actually internal. So in the abdomen, you've got most of the systems, such as the circulatory system, excretory system, digestive system, reproductive systems as well. So we're only going to have a brief look at the abdomen, but we'll have a look at one of the more interesting parts of that abdomen. and it's also one of the more interesting parts as well for beekeepers. Okay, so that's our 3-part bee plan. So let's start with the head. So, like I said, the head houses the sense organs. One of those sense organs are the compound eyes. So these have one pair of compound eyes. And if anyone's heard of compound eyes before, you might have seen them on flies, on butterflies, on things like that. And they're quite common over a lot of insects and other related animals. And they're basically made of lots of what I would call little eyes. The posh name, the scientific name for them is Ommatidia. The compound nature of that eye is that they have lots and lots of these Ommatidia. There's about 7,000 in this worker bee eye. And they are used basically outside the hive. So when a bee is inside its nest, it's really, really dark. So eyes are useless. When it comes out of the hive, to do things like foraging for nectar or pollen, or to go and mate with the queen, or to go and form a swarm, they'll obviously need to use those eyes. The compound eye is used for a couple of different things as well. It is used for, as we would use vision, to see a bit of detail, although being a compound eye, the detail that a honeybee can see is not as good as ours. We've got pretty sharp vision. You would have 100th of the detail that we would normally see. So think of it as a pixelated picture that the bee can see. It manages to use it to find flowers and to find other bees and things, so it does well enough. It also uses the compound eye to see colour. So obviously, as workers are foraging around for flowers, it will use the eye to actually see the colours of the flowers. The colours are slightly different in terms of what we can see. So it's shifted in terms of the wavelength. So these can see ultraviolet, because we can't. But they can't see red. So anything red just looks black to them. Ultraviolet is really useful because flowers have realised that these can see ultraviolet, so they will actually put ultraviolet patterns onto the petals and direct them to the nectaries where the nectar is. So they'll actually be saying, come and land on me, I've got some nice sweet syrup for you. If you ever look at flowers with a UV light, you can see those lines. Another thing that this compound eye can do is detect polarised light. So as the light from the sun comes through the atmosphere, it's polarised, and even on a cloudy day, a bee knows exactly where the sun is. So when they're going back to the nest, when the foragers are going back to the nest, to tell the others where all the lovely flowers are, go out and find some food, you can use the waggle dance to actually tell them where that food is. And the waggle dance uses the sun as a marker in the sky. So this compound eye is absolutely brilliant at doing that. Drone eye, I've got a picture in a couple of slides' time of a drone compound eye. Basically, their eyes are bigger because what they need to do is actually see the queen when they're trying to mate her. So they have actually bigger eyes, and their ommatidia, those little tiny parts of the eye, are actually bigger as well. So I always think of the big bad wolf with the guys, all the better to see you with. So there you go. And you'll be able to see in this picture that this bee has hairy eyes as well. A couple of reasons that bees have hairy eyes. One is to stop any particles from falling on the eye and blocking the vision, so acting a little like our eyelashes. The other reason is I think it gives them some idea as to the wind speed. So as they're flying through the air, the movement of those hairs can actually give them a bit of information about how fast they're going. These also have 3 other eyes. So they've got a pair of compound eyes. They've got 3 other eyes, which are called ocelli. These are really simple eyes, though. So there's 3 on the head. You can only see one of them on this picture, but basically they're arranged in a triangular formation on the top of a worker's head. And we think that these are basically just used for interpreting light and dark. So a little up and down, a little bit of direction for them. So they're not really used to see any detail around them. So these are just used for basic light and dark, really, and not to actually hear any, not to actually see any detail. If we look at a drone head, let me just go on to the next slide. You can see here on the drone that the compound eyes are really, really big, and they actually meet in the middle on the top of the drone's head. So what that means is when you look at a drone, it looks like it's just all eyes. And because of that, the 3 ocelli that are normally on top of the head are actually pushed down onto the forehead of the drone. But you can actually see that the compound eyes are a lot bigger, and they cover a lot more of the drone's head. Okay, so the other thing that honeybees have to detect things around them are a pair of antennae. And right at the base of the antenna, you've got a ball and socket joint. So these can be moved around quite independently all over the place. And the antennae are used for detecting any, well, they've got a variety of uses. Let's go through the structure, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what they're used for. So they've got a very long bit called the scape. So this is for any scientists that are out there. I've just put some nice scientific terms on there. So the scape is where the ball and socket joint emerges from, and that then makes a hinge joint with this structure called the pedicel. And then you've just got lots of different segments which make up the flagellum. There's one extra segment in the drone antennae compared to a worker. And one of the reasons we think that is present is because the drones actually use the antennae to sniff out and smell the queen while they're trying to find her to mate with her. The hinge joint, where the pedicel is actually used as a speedometer. So as the bee is flying through the air, there's a structure inside the pedicel called the organ of Johnston. And that actually gives the bee a little bit of an idea as to how fast the antenna is vibrating as it's flying, and that will give it an idea as to how fast or how far it's actually flown. And some people have put bees in wind tunnels and things, and actually shown that the windier it is, the further the bee thinks they've flown. So they actually use that information as like a distance and a speedometer. So yeah, so that's the antennae. And then if we go in a little bit closer to an antennae, so this is the tip of the antennae, so this is the very edge of the last segment of the flagellum, and you can actually see that there's lots of little circles, and this is a slide preparation, so what's been left behind is the cuticle, but a lot of these little circles are pits or pores. So one of the problems with having an exoskeleton, basically a suit of armour, is that you can't get information about your environment very easily from the outside. So what you've got to do is try and get those chemicals or those signals into your body. So the antenna is absolutely covered with these what we call sensilla. And some of them have holes in them, so then chemicals can enter, so that would help with taste and smell. Some of them have little pegs, so little protrusions, which might help with some mechanical detection, and others we think detect things like carbon dioxide levels or humidity levels. Carbon dioxide is a really good one, because I know as a beekeeper, if I blow or breathe onto my bees, they suddenly disappear. They scarper and move off the frames. So some of these sense organs must detect things like carbon dioxide, and it might help them detect predators in the wild. And this is an antenna drone, an antenna of a drone, and a drone antenna has so many more of these sensilla on their antenna. So about 30,000 of these on each antenna, whereas only about 5,000 to 6,000 of a worker. So you can actually see that even going out and foraging with workers, going out and smelling out flowers and things, is not as important as a drone finding a queen. So there you go. So yeah, suit of armour, trying to get some information in is quite difficult. If we look at the face of a honeybee, I always think it looks a bit like an alien. So again, we've got some scientific words here if you're interested. We've got the cheeks, which are the genna. We've got the front of the face or the nose, which is the clypeus. The top lip is called the labrum, and underneath that is 2 mandibles. And these are used for things like chewing and grooming and preparing wax. So one of the jobs of a worker is to actually produce wax and produce the comb that the nest works on. So so these mandibles are teeth-like in terms of what their job is. And if we compare the mandibles of a worker and a drone, so the one on the left is a drone mandible. It looks a bit hairy as well. And the one on the right is a worker mandible. You can see the size difference first of all, which I think is very interesting. So a drone does nothing with its mandibles. So they're quite small because they don't really do anything. Whereas a worker's mandibles are quite large. They're almost like a multifunctional tool. So they've got a bit of a spoon shape to them, so they can secrete saliva and brood food onto the larvae. But they can also use that for pressing and manipulating wax. They can use them for chewing, although how they use them for chewing I'm still not certain, because I would say the one on the left with the drone has got more teeth on it than the one on the right, which is the worker one. But they use them as teeth basically, and they'll use those mandibles. The other mouth parts, and apologies for the dead bee on the picture, but it's very hard to get a really good picture of a bee that's sticking out its proboscis. So the other mouth parts that a bee uses is the proboscis, and this is basically where the worker will use the proboscis to go out, suck up any liquid food, so nectar, or water if it needs to bring water back to the hive, and it will use that proboscis as almost like a modified straw. And if we look at the structure of a proboscis, so this is a slide of a flattened proboscis out of the bee, we'll see that it's made up of lots and lots of different parts. Normally, when the bee is not using its proboscis, it's almost like tucked under its chin. And then when it needs to use it, it's actually almost like slung outwards in front of its mouth. And what it will do is it will use these spines on the back of the mouth part. So these are called the cardo and the lorum, and they're almost like little cuticular spines, and muscles that are articulating with them will push the whole lot and swing it out from underneath the chin of the bee. What will then happen is that all the bits will stick together. So the bee will use its top lip, its labrum, and it will use its mandibles at the side to put the labial palps and the galea around the glossa, and that will just form this modified drinking straw. So
when I first went into beekeeping and I saw bees on flowers, I just thought that they had like a straw as a mouth part and that they just sort of like used it to suck things up. I didn't realise how complicated their mouth parts actually were. So right in the middle is this glossa. So this is what forms the other parts articulate around this tube and form the feeding tube. And you can see that it's got lots and lots of little segments. So it uses its hydrostatic pressure, uses its hemolymph to actually expand this structure. And it's got a bit of a harder rod through the middle, so then it can actually form this long protrusion or this long structure, and it's covered in hairs. Again, we're not 100% sure as to why it's covered in hairs, but it could have a couple of different functions: stop it getting clogged up, or to actually help to suck up the liquids. And then right at the end, we've got this brilliantly named structure called the flabellum. Which is basically, it looks a little bit like a spoon on the end of the proboscis. And again, what we think the bee uses it for is to actually scrape or collect little bits of food that will then go up into the feeding tube of the proboscis. So something that looks pretty simple is actually quite complicated in the bee world, even just trying to suck up some liquids from flowers and things. Okay, so that's the mouth parts and that's the head. So we are now going to go on to the thorax. So this is where we've got the wings and the legs. So that's what I'm going to go through next. So as a honeybee, we've got 4 wings, so 2 pairs of wings, and the front wing is called the forewing and the back wing is called the hind wing. And if you remember back to the classification, we said that bees were in the Hymenoptera order, so membranous wings. And I think you can see from this picture that there is a very thin layer of cuticle just stretched between what we call the veins, which are the strengthening parts of the wing. And bees will use these wings for a number of things. The main one is obviously for flying. So our foragers will go out and visit flowers and collect nectar or water or propolis or pollen and bring it back to the hive. The drones will use it to fly off to find some queens. And the workers may also use the wings in the hive as well. So if it's a hot day, they will fan air through the nest to cool it down. They may use the wings to fan and reduce the water content of honey. And they may also use the wings to fan and distribute pheromones around the hive. So sometimes you'll see bees at the entrance of a hive when it's been disturbed. They'll have the back ends in the air. They'll be exposing what we call the Nasonoff gland, and they'll be fanning the wings very, very quickly, and that will be distributing that pheromone. And it's usually a come over here pheromone, so it'll be calling the bees back to the hive. We can see on this slide that the forewing at the top is bigger than the hind wing. And some beekeepers have actually used the vein patterns of these wings. It's the forewing that they use to actually identify different races of honeybee. So I've read that there's at least 13 races of the Western honeybee, and some of them will have different vein patterns, and some beekeepers actually use that to actually classify them into the different races. The great thing about the wings, though, is that although they have 2 wings on each side, when they're flying, the bees will actually connect the 2 wings together, and this is the front edge of the hind wing, and there's these little hooks called hamuli, and they will actually slip into a little fold at the back of the forewing, and that will join the 2 wings together so that the bee has a bigger wing, which will help with orientation, and also to reduce drag. And then when the bee is at rest, it will unclip the 2 wings, and it will then fold them back behind its body and put them out of use. So I think these are fascinating. Just about 20 little hooks just on the front of the forewing. And if I go back to the previous slide, I think you should be able to see them there on the forewing. I don't know whether you can see my cursor moving or not, but that's where they're located. Back to the drone, and I've just put this picture in just to show how big the thorax of the drone is, and that thorax is just full of muscle, because the drones actually sometimes have to fly further than the workers to go and find a queen. So you know, they can go tens of kilometres away to go and find a queen to mate with. So they need a lot of muscle to actually do that. So the thorax is really, really big, and I think that they're quite furry. Because they need to keep that thorax nice and warm to get the flight muscles working quite effectively. Bees are covered in hairs, so we've got some plumose hairs at the top and some straight hairs at the bottom. So hairs can be used to collect pollen if a bee is in a flower, or it can be used for sensory information, or tactile information, or to keep a structure clean as well, such as the eyes and things. So if we look at the legs, remember I said that they are arthropods. So bees are arthropods, so they've got jointed legs. So you can see there's a lot of joints in a bee's leg. I'm not going to test you on the names of the parts of the leg, but it's just to give you an idea that you know, there are lots of parts to a bee's leg. The interesting thing though is if you look at the 3 pairs of legs, you'll find that each one is adapted for a different function. So this is a picture of a drone. It looks a little bit out of focus, but the bit that I wanted to focus on was here. And this is the first leg, or the foreleg, and it's got a little notch between 2 of the segments. And this is called the antenna cleaner. So what the bee will do is it will stick its antenna in that little notch. There's a little flap that you can see there. It will close that flap over, which is called the fibula, and then it will pull its antenna through that little notch, and that notch is covered in hairs. And what that will do is it will brush anything off the antenna. So if you remember, the antenna have a very important sensory function for the bee. So they'll need to keep it nice and clean to make sure that it's actually picking up those senses that it needs to. So this is a brilliant example of an adaptation for cleaning your antenna. So there you go, built-in antenna cleaner on the foreleg. If we go to the middle leg, it really doesn't have much of a specialised structure. It will help to brush pollen off the bee's back, and it seems to have this spine radiating out from one of the segments, and people have sort of like tried to guess what this spine is used for, and one theory is it actually doesn't do anything at all. So I've read somewhere, and I'm not a specialist on bumblebees, but I've read somewhere that some bumblebees actually have a spine like this on all of the legs, and it does nothing. So it's not something that stabs pollen, it's not something that they use defensively, it just doesn't seem to have a function at all. If we go to the back leg of a bee, in a worker, this is really, really specialised. So a worker has to go out and forage, needs to bring back pollen back to the hive, which is the protein part of the diet, and that pollen will get stuck on the bee's hairs as it's circling around in a flower. All the legs have brushes on the inside of the legs, so they will brush any pollen from the body of the bee, and they will pass that pollen back to this hind leg. And what the bee will do is it will press that pollen in the pollen press, so it will actually compact the pollen grains together, and then it will stick it onto the pollen basket, which is it's got a bit of a concave surface to it. And if it's mixed some of the pollen at the front of its body with a bit of saliva, then it will make that nice and sticky. And it's actually a bit like a carrier basket. So a worker bee will actually carry its pollen back to the hive on its back leg. So these are amazing adaptations. Now, that's what a bee can do. That's a very industrious bee, is that one. So you can see a massive pollen pellet on its hind leg, and that's simply held there by a bit of spit and the concaveness of that pollen basket. So this is how bees will bring back their pollen from the flowers. This is a really bad slide. I didn't have time to make a new one, but this is a queen's back leg. And you can see that you might be able to see that there's a bit of a joint between the two segments, but there's no long hairs, there's no pollen brush, and the bee, the queen doesn't collect any pollen, so it has no need for that specialised back leg. And then the end of the leg is a claw, basically. It's the pretarsus, or the foot. So bees can climb up pretty much anything. So they've got a pair of claws on each leg, and that will be used to climb on anything. If the structure is smooth, and there's very few things that I can think of that are really, really smooth in nature. We make things that are very smooth, like windows and metal things. But if a bee needs to walk up a smooth surface, between the two claws is a structure called the aerolium. And again, we're not 100% sure how it works. They don't leave a sticky residue behind them when bees walk, so we actually think it acts a little bit like a sucker. So as the bee's walking up the surface, it actually flips its claws backwards, and the aerolium, the sucker pad, actually sticks to the surface. But again, there's not a lot of research been done on bees and how they walk and things. So we're still a bit of a mystery. That's the thorax. So we're now onto the abdomen. And the only bit of the abdomen that I'm going to take you through is the painful part of the abdomen. So like I said before, most of the structures of the abdomen are internal, but there's one that becomes external sometimes, and you can see it protruding from the back end of this bee here, and it is the sting. So as a beekeeper, we really do encounter this quite a few times, as it is the defence mechanism of the colony to stop people like us, or to stop predators from actually stealing honey and taking away things from the hive. So it is quite an important part of beekeeping, and one of the more painful ones. And it is only the females that actually sting. So the queens and the workers can both sting, the drones can't. So if we take a look at a dissected sting, we can see that there's a long bit, which obviously is the bit that sticks into us, or the intruder, but we've got lots of articulating plates. The right hand side of this slide has been a bit damaged, so I've concentrated on the left hand side, but both sides are pretty much the same. And it sounds a little bit like the play school windows. So we've got the triangular plate, the quadrate plate, and the oblong plate. And these are just little plates that, with muscles, articulate. And as the bee stings, what it does is it bends its abdomen down, so it's 90 degrees to the surface that it wants to sting. These plates articulate against each other and actually push this rod down. And as it pushes the rod down, the end bit, which is called the lancet, actually comes out through the segments of the bee and actually goes into the surface that the bee wants to sting. And between the two halves of the lancet runs a tube, an empty tube, and the venom sac empties its venom into that tube. So these plates actually go into the surface. My finger, for example, the venom sac actually has muscles that pump against the walls and pump the venom down into the lancet, and the lancet is actually barbed. So when we look at the tip of the lancet, we actually find that it has a bit of a sawing action as the bee is stinging you. And as the bee tries to pull each side out, it gets stuck, so it just goes deeper and deeper. Unfortunately, once the work has stung you, it will pull the back end of its sting off, so its abdomen will separate from the sting. The poor bee will die a few hours later, potentially, because it's lost part of its abdomen. The sting can stay in the person or the intruder, and the venom sac will carry on pumping venom in for about 30 seconds or so, up to a minute. If this was a queen sting, the barbs would be very, very smooth. So a queen can sting, but the queen won't die if it stings you. She doesn't sting very many beekeepers. What she will normally do is sting other queens. So when she stings, she can actually pull her sting back out. It doesn't get stuck at all. But it is part of the more painful part of beekeeping, and part of a defensive mechanism. Unusually, well, not unusually, but slightly differently is the drone. And I said I wasn't going to do anything internal, but this is the only internal bits that I'm going to show you. And this is actually part of the endophallus of a drone. And you can actually see where the sting plates, the lancets, have actually been used to actually strengthen that structure. So you've got the two sides, which are separated here, but they do resemble something a little bit like that. So the sting has been modified in the drone and is actually used as part of the reproductive structure. So there you go. That the sting is the end part of my talk. So the most painful bit, but hopefully that is the end of the bee, and the end of my talk. I'm hoping I've been on time.